The Hacker and Summers text, a writer's reference, addresses types of evidence. In section A2, the Hacker and Summers text gives you specific examples. Gives you specific examples of the types of evidence that you use in argument. You use facts and statistics, examples and illustration, expert opinion. Those who are considered to be scholars in their field. In A3, the Hacker and Summers text also discusses what a reasonable argument is, using generalization or inductive reasoning, using analogies, using cause and effect, looking at options, making assumptions, reaching conclusions based on deductive reasoning, and using legitimate emotional appeals, what we refer to sometimes as pathos. I want to talk to you about some particular things, and then I've also provided notes so that you can go back and look at these in a little bit more detail. When Hacker and Summers discusses constructing reasonable arguments, they mention the fact that reasonable people may disagree. We don't have to be agreeable with everyone all the time. That we are assertive when we are arguing for a position. That means that we are confident and bold, but that is not the same as aggressive. And finally, they talk in terms of joining a conversation. In order to join a conversation, you need to know where the participants are when you enter. And when Hacker and Summers discuss entering into that conversation, they talk about the context, the social context and the intellectual context. Public policy, how we make laws, rules, what we do to treat each other with respect, are decisions that are made in a social context, and they have an intellectual component. That is, there is rational, reasonable thought that goes into making those policies and decisions. When we have a scholarly debate, such as we may have in an academic setting, those occur in intellectual context, but they typically have a social dimension. If you are reading the text, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, you see that there are public policy and scholarly debates that are entered into in that text about the ethics of medical research, about how we conduct ourselves in that environment. Being aware of these contexts is important. If you aren't sure about what the context is, what the background and the history is, then that's one way that you educate yourself by reading. And finally, in this section, when you are thinking in terms of your argument and presenting it, you need to think of the fact that you are speaking to a panel of jurors. They're going to make up their minds after they listen to all sides of the argument. You need to make up your mind after you have listened to all sides of the argument. Think about who's interested or affected by the issue. Think about the situation so you would know who would be. Second, you narrow the audience. That is, think in terms of an audience that is most interested in the topic, and perhaps that is who your audience will be. But your audience is going to share interest and have established approaches for investigating and talking about issues and specialized vocabulary, which means that when we are engaging our audience, we think in terms of what they understand and how they talk about it. So Hacker and Summers tells us that we use facts, statistics, examples, illustrations, and expert opinion to convince our audience that our position is a legitimate one. Now let's look at what Hacker and Summers consider to be reasonable argument. Now these are notes from the section A3, but I want you to look, and we're going to look at these a little bit more in more detail later. But I want you to be aware of how you create an argument that is legitimate or reasonable. Arguments are supported with evidence. It is not proof, but it is support. We can generalize. We can take a sample, and from that sample we can reach a conclusion. We can make an analogy. We can say that two things are very much alike. We can use cause and effect. We can show all possible causes in order to weigh each one and determine what the cause and effect in a situation is. We need to weigh options. That is, we want to look at all of the options and not only one or two before we determine our position and the merit of each one. We can make assumptions. An assumption is a claim that is taken to be true without the need of proof. That is something that is a foundational belief within a culture, within a society. But remember that if it's controversial, you need to support it. Sometimes we make assumptions about things we need to support. On the other side of generalizing is deducing. We can put things together like Sherlock Holmes. And these two are approximations and not absolutes. Then we can use legitimate or unfair emotional appeals. It is legitimate to appeal to emotion, but it is not legitimate to use biased language, to attack the people rather than the idea, to associate a name of prestige with merit. Just because someone is well known doesn't mean that that lends strength to an argument. That we argue that a lot of people agree, that doesn't mean that it's more true, and that we use irrelevant issues. These are reasonable arguments, but each one of these reasonable arguments, as the section of the text points out, can be used illegitimately, and that's what we're going to talk about when we discuss logical fallacies. So we use particular types of evidence. You can look at these sections in the textbook, A2 and A3, to tell you what is considered to be legitimate evidence and further discussion, and also what is considered to be reasonable argument, what kinds of information we use to create an argument. And particularly, an argument that is reasonable and one that will be received by our audience and listened to, because that is always our goal.